Hi everyone, welcome to this new workshop episode. I hope you are all safe and healthy and that you stay at home, and that even though this isolation is not really funny, that it gives you more time to spend at making music. So I will introduce myself. My name is Edouard. I work at Arteria since 2015. And I'm currently the head of the support, and I'm also working in the product management department. So nice to meet you. And I'm super happy to be here with you guys. A little bit stressed, but that's okay. And today we will be talking about the MatrixBrute, our analog flagship synthesizer. So I've been working on this synthesizer in the past month. So I'm super happy to have a quick talk and a workshop with you guys with this product. So the program of today will be divided in two parts, I think. So it's not a new product, but maybe there are some people watching the stream that don't know this product yet. So I will take a moment to give you a quick overview of its features. And then I would like to focus a little bit on the update we released recently, the 2.0 update, and all the features it includes. And then I would like to take the time to have a look at two presets made by Victor Morello, one of our sound designers and a good friend of mine. And I think these two presets make a smart use of the new features we implemented. So I just want to try to mess around and show you how he managed to get these sounds out of the MatrixBrute. So let's get started. And so first we'll have a little overview of the main panel of the voice of the MatrixBrute. So let's get started. So first I will start with the sound generators. So I will load an empty preset to show you how it works. So basically we have three sound generators in the MatrixBrute. So the oscillator 1, oscillator 2 and oscillator 3. So the oscillator 1 and the oscillator 2 are the same, so I will show you briefly how do they work. So these are Brute oscillators. This is kind of the signature of the Brute synthesizers. It means that you can mix several waveforms at the same time instead of having to pick only one. So basically, here is a sawtooth, and I can also add a square wave at the same time, for example, or a triangle at the same time. So each waveform has its own parameter, let's say, that is exclusive to each waveform. So for example, the sawtooth has an ultra saw, a kind of chorus. Then the square wave has pulse width modulation. And finally, the sweet triangle. And the triangle has a wave folder, and I really like this effect because it creates very rich harmonics. And it can be used, for example, with an envelope to create very plucked sounds, and it can sound really badass in the sub-frequencies. And in addition to these parameters, there is also a sub-oscillator that plays 1 octave lower, and it can be a sine or square. And of course, you can fine-tune the pitch of the oscillator, and you have a chorus parameter as well. So basically, this is the first oscillator. The second one is pretty similar, so I won't describe it. The third one is a little bit particular because it's simpler, but at the same time is really useful because it can generate at the same time a waveform and also a low frequency oscillation. So you can hear it normally and modulate other parameters with it at the same time, which is very convenient. Then you have an analog noise generator. So you have different flavors of noise. So white noise, pink noise, red noise, and blue noise. So this is really useful to give like more character and texture to your presets, pads, and everything. So yeah, and on top of that, you have the external input. So there is an input on the backside of the MatrixBrute, and you can feed any signal that you want. So you can, for example, use an external modular oscillator, or you can plug your guitar inside of the external input and process the sound with the filters and or even blend it with the rest of your audio chain. So that's it for the modulators. Maybe I can talk a little bit about the audio modulations, because you can also create some FM, for example. So for example, here you have the audio mod, and if I turn this knob, the VCO1 will modulate the VCO2 and create some FM synthesis. So you can also modulate the VCO1 and the VCO2 with the VCO3 here. And you can also modulate the filters cutoff with the VCO3. And the last parameter is a modulation using noise. So for example, you can modulate the VCO1 with some noise, or for example, the filter one with some noise as well. This gives kind of a lo-fi feeling, and it can be very useful in some situations. So yeah, basically these are the audio modulations, and all these modulations are audio rate. So if you want standard modulations, we'll see that later with the modulation section. So then we have the two filters that we talked a little bit about before. So first there is the Steiner filter. So here I just routed my oscillators to the Steiner. So both filters are multi-mode. You have a low pass, band pass, high pass, and notch mode on the Steiner, but you don't have the notch on the latter filter. And both filters can have two different slopes, 24 dB per octave and also 12 dB per octave. On the Steiner filter, I personally prefer the 12 dB. So the Steiner has a lot of character, so if you drive it hard, it will sound very harsh, but if you drive it slowly, it will sound almost liquid, and I really like it. And then you have the ladder filter, a more classic design that is maybe a little bit smoother. And on this one, I prefer the 24 dB slope. So yeah. Then what can I say? Oh yes, at the end of the audio chain, you also have some analog effects. So you have, for example, a delay, or you have a stereo delay, you have a mono delay. You also have a chorus, a flanger, and also reverb. So this is pretty much everything about the main voice, so about the analog synthesis. And maybe on top of that, I could add a comment on the different play modes that you have with the voice. So everything I did before was monophonic, but you have kind of a hack that mimics polyphonic behavior, and it's called the paraphonic mode. So basically, this mode lets you play several notes at the same time with a voice allocation. So it lets you play chords, but you still only have one filter. But still, you can achieve very great results. So each oscillator is assigned to the key you are pressing, and it's it's kind of polyphonic, and you can create a wide variety of sounds that you normally can do with a monophonic synth. And you also have duo split mode. So I'm not a keyboardist, I don't really use it that much, but the keyboardist really like this mode. So you can assign, for example, one side of the keyboard to one filter, and so like this. For example, on this side I have this lead, and on the left side I have the oscillator 3, so I can, for example, so I can have this bass sound on the left and this lead sound on the right. So I don't use it that much, but I know that keyboardists really love to be able to do that, so they can play bass lines and leads at the same time. But I don't really know how to play a keyboard with the two hands separately, so I don't really use it that much. So now maybe we can talk a little bit about the modulations. So on the Matrix you have three main categories. So I will dive into the blue one, which is the modulations section. So basically a modulation is a modulation source is a parameter, well, not really a parameter, but a module that will turn a knob like if you were turning it manually. So for example, an LFO, if I program a simple patch, I will load something else, something virgin. So for example, if I have my triangle, and I maybe want the metalizer to be modulated by a LFO, well, I will assign it with the LFO1, for example, on the metalizer, and it will mimic like if I was turning the knob. So it's just to explain what is a modulation. So basically, you have a wide panel of different modulators. So you have three envelopes right here. The first one is pre-assigned to the filters thanks to the envelope amount buttons, knobs, sorry. And the second one is assigned to the amplitude of your signal, while the third one is not assigned in any patch, and you can do it freely the way you want. You also have an envelope follower that will use the amplitude of the signal fed into the external input to create a modulation. And of course, you have two LFOs. The one I, for example, assign to the metalizer, but you can assign it to anything you want. So it can be the pitch, for example, of your oscillator, anything. And the oscillator 3 that we talked before will generate sound and at the same time modulations. Then you have all the classics from the keyboard. So you have a mod wheel, you have the keyboard that can send modulations as well. So for example, it's useful when you play high notes in the keyboard to close a little bit the filters and reduce the high frequencies that can be aggressive. And of course, then you have the velocity that will respond to your key presses, and the aftertouch that will respond to the further pressure that you can apply after a key press, and that can give a lot of expressiveness to your plays. You also have the sequencer that can output some modulations. I will talk about it later. And of course, the 4 macro knobs on which you can assign different parameters, and it's really helpful to help you performing and create subtle or very drastic variations to your sound. So yeah, this is the modulation sources that you have on the MatrixBrute, and then you have modulation destinations. So the 12 first destinations are hardwired, so you can change them, but each of them has a CV output on the back of the unit and a CV input, which means that if I send, for example, this LFO to one of these destinations, I can get the CV output of this destination and, for example, send it to my modular to modulate any module within my Eurorack system. And on the right of the destinations, you have 4 columns. These ones are really important because these let you assign any parameter on the synth as a destination. So, for example, I can assign, let's say, the FX dry wet potentiometer. So I will hold this button and turn it, and right away it will be assigned. And then I can, for example, decide to assign a LFO to it. And it will enable and disable the phaser on it. So I will talk about it a little bit more later, because on the update we improved the way it works, so you have more choices on the way you will make your patches. And of course, last detail, each modulation amount I'm doing can be modulated as well. So it's really hard to do that in a modular system because you need to have a VCA to do that. And here, each patch point can be assigned to the destinations, and I can then modulate, for example, this modulation with my mod wheel, and it costs nothing. So this is what makes the MatrixBrute so powerful, because it's a modular system, but you have almost 1 VCA per patch point. So it's really useful to have this. So now I can maybe finish with the sequencer. So first you have an arpeggiator. We'll reset the preset. So you have an arpeggiator that can be used in different modes, so up, down, and random, and with different divisions. And you will notice that each of my press has a different velocity value. So if I play the same chord but with a different velocity, each time it will be different, so it's really expressive. But you need to have the velocity mapped to a parameter at this moment. So maybe now I can show you the sequencer. So it's a quite huge sequencer. It's 64-step length maximum, and the bottom rows are the triggers, and you also have 3 other rows. So the first and then above the step line is the accent. So the accent controls the amount of envelope that will be applied to your sequence. So here I don't have any accents, but I can add some. I will raise the slider. You can see that on the accent, the filter opens up more. So I can create variations like this. And then I can also add some slides. Another bit of effects. Reduce the effects of the accent now. So all the steps will sound regular. I will push it again. So yeah, and then we have a last mode that is quite specific to the MatrixBrute, and it's called the MatrixBrute arpeggiator. So basically, it's an arpeggiator that uses 4 notes, and you can shift the octave of each note separately with the blue, with the bottom rows. So if I play 3 notes, for example, I will reload it again. We'll start from scratch, like this. So yeah, here it is. So I will shift the octaves of each note. And I can also switch by 1 semitone the octaves, instead of octaves. So purple is +1 semitone, and red is -1 semitone. And now I will also shift these octaves. So it's half a sequencer, half an arpeggiator. So this mode is really specific to the Matrix, and it's really creative. So I think that's all for the sequencing part. So I will end with the last part of the Matrix, which is the preset part. And here it's very specific because it's an analog synth, but each and every parameter that you can see on this panel is analog, but you have a digital control on each parameter. So this lets you have presets. So when recalling a preset, the value of each analog parameter will be recalled with the preset. And so you have 256 presets here. And on top of that, it's really useful because you can, for example, record in your DAW any motion that you are doing on the knobs of your MatrixBrute, and it will be recorded as automations. And for example, if I record something and then modify the automations within my DAW, I can send it back to my MatrixBrute to record it and have a perfect result, let's say. So it's the advantage of the analog sound, and at the same time the benefits of the digital technology. So right now I think I'm done with the overview of the MatrixBrute. So as a little conclusion, I can say that this synth is really pleasant to use because it's hands-on. You have like all the controls in front of you, you don't have submenus, and anything that you want to tweak, you just have to take your hand and turn the knob, and it's really comfortable to be able to work efficiently, and you can really easily capture your ideas and creativity. So basically with this performance control and with the digital control as well, it can either be a good companion when you're going on stage, and at the same time it can be very good to have this in your studio and to work in more details and record and edit and everything. So I think I'm done with the overview, and now I will talk about the 2.0 update. So basically I worked with the MatrixBrute team on this update, and the challenge here was to add functions and to improve the existing workflow, but one rule remained, and we didn't want to break how easy it is to use this synthesizer and how everything is hands-on. We didn't want to modify the voice, and even if very good ideas were there, We didn't want to hide something in sub-menus and everything. We wanted to keep the core and the spirit of this synth, which is to keep it easy to use. So basically, we received a lot of feature requests and everything, and we tried to gather them and select what made the most sense. So first, one kind of problem that we identify is that you couldn't edit your parameters directly on the synth, and you needed a computer to do that. And basically, if you're going on stage and that you can't access a computer, this can be embarrassing. So the synth doesn't have any screen, so we wonder how can we do that. And we figured a solution. So we only have 4 characters on the right and 3 on the left, but we implemented a mode that is called the settings mode. And if you press these 3 buttons at the same time, you have all the parameters here with their value displayed on the matrix, and you can browse them with the right arrows, and you can change the value of it with the preset arrows, or you can just do it with your finger directly on the matrix. So this solved this problem of having the synth that cannot be edited without the MIDI control center and your computer. So now you're safe, you can travel with it and change any parameter within the synth. There is no problem anymore. So then maybe I should load a preset and show you the new mode that we implemented. So the problematic was sometimes I'm editing a preset and I'm not really sure if the new version of this preset is better than before. And so at this moment I wonder, shall I save it on another preset slot? But I don't really know what's in this preset slot as well. So we needed a way to compare a preset between each other. So we created a compare mode with a dedicated compare memory. So for example, I have this bass line here. And basically, I want to edit it a little bit, and then I will show you how to compare it with the previous version of the preset. So I will turn play on. And I will start tweaking it, so it's a little bit muddy. I will try to make it a little bit more punchy. A bit more snappy with the envelope, for example. A bit of distortion maybe as well. More fatness. And maybe a little bit of flanger. Yeah. So like this, it's kind of better, I think. Yeah, so right now I still want to be sure that my previous version was, let's say, that I want to keep this version of the preset. So I will hold preset and press the preset slot that I want to preview. At this moment, the compare mode is enabled and it blinks in blue. And now I will hear the sound of the previous state that has been saved in this slot. So yeah, it's quite muddy. I prefer definitely my new version. Let's check it again by pressing the preset knob again, button, sorry. So it's definitely better. So it really helps me to do an A/B comparison, for example, with a preset I'm editing, or to preview a slot before to override it. So it's just more comfortable. So next, we can talk maybe about the enhancement we made on the LFOs. So first, we have received a lot of requests to be able to sync your LFOs with triplets or dotted divisions, which wasn't possible before. So right now it's possible. All you have to do is hold the sync button here, and you can now press the division buttons that will show you if it's dotted or triplets. And in addition to this, we implemented a new mode of the LFOs, and this mode is called the custom waveform LFO. So on this preset, for example, I will let you hear this. So on this preset, there is no sequencer playing. So basically, when you browse the waveforms of your LFOs, you will see that between the random smooth and the sine wave, you have all the LEDs enabled. So this is the custom mode, and if you press both arrows at the same time, you can edit this waveform from the matrix. So the steps that you were hearing before are these movements in the LFO. And you can see that the bottom row is lit in blue. So this means that each column will be stepped between each other. So if I press these buttons, it turns red, and it will smooth the transition between each step. So listen to this. So this is really helpful. It can help you create, for example, exponential envelopes that are smooth, or step sequencers. There are tons of uses that you can do with it. So basically, I will not talk too long about this right now, because the preset that we will be reviewing later on are using this feature, and we'll see in depth what you can do with it. So on top of that, I can maybe talk about another addition. So we started to talk about it before, but now let's dive into it. So before, you only had 4 custom destination that you could assign to your matrix. Now we implemented a new mode that lets you have 4 pages of 4 destinations. So for a total of 16, it's like if the matrix was that size. So it's really a huge benefit for sound design purpose. And especially when you start to modulate modulation amounts. So let's have a look at my preset right now. So right now it's quite static, but as I assigned different modulations to my VCOs, for example, the metallizer is being modulated, but we can't hear it now, because I assigned my module to modulate the modulation amounts of my preset. So I have 4 initial modulations, and I used 4 additional modulations to modulate the modulations amount. And now, when I will raise the module, it will create movements and enable these modulations from the LFOs to the VCOs. So you can hear the little glitches. And something very particular about this patch is that it's paraphonic, of course, but I used a different waveform on each oscillator. So basically, depending on the order I will play my chord, it will sound different. For example, so basically with these 4 additional columns, you really have a lot of potential to express your sound design experiments, and I invite you to dig into this to explore a little bit more the potential of the matrix. So to finish with the update, I will talk about the workflow improvements we've brought with the update, and especially on the sequencer, because there are little details that can really help you work faster. So first, it's very simple, but now you can hold tab and turn the right button to change the tempo in whole numbers instead of decimals. Another addition that is really useful is to be able to delete groups of notes, because back in the days you had to press the steps individually, which could take time because there are 64 steps. Or delete the whole sequence, but you don't especially need to delete the whole sequence when editing something. So now, when pressing to the right to the left, from the right to the left, you can delete blocks of steps like this. And in the opposite, you can add a tie note from the left to the right, and if you press it from the left to the right again, you will have all the steps included within this gap. So right now, I will remove this content. And I have this sequence here. So basically in this sequence I'm using a little hack. So let's listen to it right now. So basically this is a paraphonic preset. But it's not supposed to let you hear several notes because you need to press several keys at the same time to trigger different voices. But here I'm using a little hack that have been found by Yves, one of our collaborators with the MatrixBrute and MatrixBrute. And basically when doing tied notes, you will hear the voices that have been triggered before if you have some release, for example. So right now it's half a polyphonic sequence. Let's para-polyphonic style. And right now what I want to do, it's a new feature actually. I can, for example, rotate the sequence by holding tab and pressing the arrow. So if you're a bit clumsy when recording, it's really very useful because sometimes I record late, for example. And this way I can just shift my sequence and make sure it's starting at the correct moment. And then I may want to bring variations to this sequence. So I will just hold sec length and press the right arrow, and it will double my sequence. And if I do it again, it will double again my sequence, well, everything that is within the sec length. And now I have a 64-step sequence. And I can try to bring variations. So yeah, and maybe a last detail that I can add about the sequencer is that we totally reworked the way modulations are recorded. So I told before that I was explaining that I was about to explain what is modulation in the sequencer. So basically, it lets you per step to send a value as a modulation source to any parameter. So for example, right now, I will assign the sequencer modulation to the FX delay time. So this is this column right here. So I will set an amount of, I don't know, 18. And now I will record a motion and it will modulate the delay time applied to the sequence. And it will create a kind of drowsy feeling. So the new mode has been reworked, and if you record in real time, it will behave like more or less the micro freak. So I will show you right now. I will arm the record and press play. And as soon as I will turn my modulation knob, it will start recording. Let's see. So the recorded steps are pink. And as soon as I will reach the beginning of my recording, it stops recording. This is to avoid overlapping between your sequence, and it makes sure that you won't miss or lose the content that you recorded in the first steps. So yeah, basically, I think we saw pretty much every changes that we brought with the update to the sequencer and to the rest of the parameters. So now I think that we can switch to a new chapter, and I think it would be fun to have a look at some presets that have been designed by Victor Morello. So like I said, it's one of our sound designer in-house, and it's a good friend of mine, so I'm super happy to review his presets. And both of these presets are using the custom LFOs to do different functions, but without these custom LFOs, we wouldn't be able to do such modulations before. So let's hear the first preset. So the first preset is a rhythmic preset of drums, and we'll try to analyze what Victor did with the LFOs and how he created a rhythm with these LFOs. So yeah, let's get started. So yeah, basically it's quite simple, but still it's only the MatrixBrute who generates this sound. So like you probably heard, we have 3 main elements, so let's listen again. So we have 3 elements, main elements. We have a kick, we have a hat and a snare. So this is quite the same element, but just stronger and lower. And we have a bass line. So let's try to understand how did he manage to sequence these elements. So basically the sequencer is playing all the time the same note. It acts like an arpeggiator. So if I remove the connections that starts from the LFO1 and LFO2 and raise the mixer of all the elements, everything will play at the same time. Let's listen to this. So it's kind of a mess. So we may want that each element play its own pattern so it can create a proper groove. So let's try to figure how Victor did. So with the LFO1 here, it was assigned to the VCO1 level here in the mixer. And this is actually what creates the kick. So I will re-enable this. And you can see that there is a positive amount applied to it. So I will just lower the other elements volume. Like this. There you go. So if we look at the LFO, each spike triggers a kick. The higher is the spike, the louder is the kick. Good, so maybe I will just change the rhythm a little bit. Nice. Then let's get back on the modulation side. And if you remember, it was also assigned to the VCO3 level. But the VCO3 is the baseline. So it's not positive. Like you can see here, it's a negative modulation. So I will bring back the bass. And basically, as it's negative, when the kicks in, the bass will duck. And Victor made a very smart thing here. He used the modulations as a negative value to create a sidechain effect. So now, if I increase the modulation amount of the bass, it will increase the ducking effect, so you can hear. So yeah, so this is very smart because usually we use a compressor to do that. And yeah, so that's it for the LFO1. And maybe now we can focus on the LFO2 and the hats and the snare. So let's get into it. So I will enable the LFO2 that is assigned to the VCO2. So let's listen to it briefly. I will mute the other elements. So you can hear this little body. This is the body of the snare. So it's not really punchy right now, but if you add some noise. So here is the pattern of the LFO2. So you can see that the big spikes are actually the snares, and the little ones make you feel like it's hi-hats. But right now I think it lacks a little bit of punch. So maybe we can try to replace the blue noise by some white noise. So yeah, the snare are a little bit more punchier like this. And maybe now I can try to add another clap somewhere. Nice. And now I will bring back the other modulations. And the bass. I can also raise a little bit the noise volume so to enhance the lower triggers of the noise. And maybe I can just add a little FX. So yeah, the flanger brings a little bit more depth. So yeah, that's it. I think that you understood that Victor used the mixer and the custom waveform LFOs to sequence each element and compose a kind of groove with it. So we'll just have a listen at 2 presets that I made from this template. So I invite you guys to use this template and try to create your own rhythms. And with a little bit of fine tuning, you can really create something different. So here is the first one I made. So the tempo is higher. So yeah, and I have another one with a more dubstep rhythmic and a pretty badass bass line. So yeah, so that's it with the Rhythmic preset. And maybe now we can look at the other preset that Victor made. The other one is not a drum preset, it's melodic. And in the contrary of this preset, it's not using the sequencer to generate notes. On this one, we'll have a look at it right now. We only generate further melodies with the custom LFOs. And basically, we create a kind of polyphonic sequence by only pressing one note. So I think this is one of the most impressive presets in the Factory 2.0 bank. And let's listen to it right now. So I think this preset is beautiful. So if you noticed, there are 2 elements in this preset. One is this little arpeggio, and the second one is a pretty huge bass line. So what we can do now is analyze what are doing the two LFOs. So I will reset the connections right now. And the modulation amounts, so that each element won't be modulated and we can hear them individually. So we'll start by the arpeggio, okay? So the arpeggio without any modulations sounds like this. So right now, what we can try to do is use the LFO1 again and try to find the correct modulation amount to modulate it the way it was done before. So if you want to check, here is the pattern of the LFO1. So this is what created this kind of arpeggios. So let's try to connect the LFO1 to the VCO1 pitch again. And now we will try to find the correct modulation amount so it doesn't sound out of tune. There it is. And if I change a little bit the steps, and I can try to smooth some step. It gives a little glide effect at the end. It's good. So for now, I will mute this element, and we can now have a look at the bass. So I will raise the volume. So for information, the arpeggio was assigned to the first filter. So I turned down the volume so we can listen only to the bass, and I will turn up the volume of the second filter to listen to this element only. So this is the bass. Okay, so now we will just repeat the process. And oh yeah, I wanted to mention, for example, for the previous element, the modulation amount that was correct was 24. So basically, this is not universal. It will depend on which step you are using to compose your melodies. So you may want to explore different possibilities, and depending on which step you will assign your steps in the LFO, you can maybe find another modulation amount that fits and create different possibilities. But right now, the two elements are using this 24 modulation, 24 amount. So now I will just repeat the process and show you what happens when I move the modulation amount. So there it is. And maybe now I can bring the other element. Oh, maybe there is a little problem. Okay. So here is the bass melody. I can try to smooth some step. Maybe I can just try to jam a little bit with it. We'll use the macro knobs to modify a little bit the elements. Increase the distortion. So yeah, that's it. This is the two presets that I wanted to show you and to explain you how Victor managed to create this amazing piece of sound design. I really like this LFO Anthem one. It's really beautiful, and you just have to add a few drums on it and you have half of a track almost. So yeah, if I could give an advice for the people who didn't update their Matrix yet, it's first, when you update your Matrix, the preset format will change. So when you have a V1 machine, if you update your machine to a V2, the presets V1 will be converted automatically to the V2 format. But in case you have any problem, to be honest, I didn't see any problem before, but you never know. You may just want to back up your bank of presets on your computer and then update your Matrix so everything is safe and you don't have to worry about anything. And of course, if you didn't update it, I just suggest to do it right away because it brings tons of new possibilities. I think I'm good now. We reviewed the two presets, and maybe now you have some questions that I can answer with you guys. What levels does the external in take? Can you send modular level right in? Yeah, it accepts some line levels, and I think I think you have a switch to control the volume. Yeah, so you have a switch to control between a line and instrument, and a volume potentiometer as well. I think I already saw this question on the net. Any chance to see one day MatrixBrute being able to send out CX or CC per all control, so it will allow them to do the Omnisphere hardware synth integration? Well, almost all the controls are sending CCs, but for SizeX, well, to be honest, I saw this feature request and we could have implemented it in the update, but to ponderate the priority of our feature request, we use numbers. And basically, only 1 or 2 customers asked for this, and it was quite a huge work to do. So it was not the priority. So next year, if we release a new update, and that some people will ask for it or to improve the way you can use the MatrixBrute as a controller, we can maybe do it. Can the sequencer just send MIDI and or CV gate notes while keeping the sound source OS filters free for keyboard play? Well, not really. The sequencer is really hardwired to the same channel, let's say, than the keyboard. So when the sequencer is playing, you will transpose the sequence. The only moment where the keyboard can play while the sequencer is enabled is when the sequence is empty, so you can try a few melodies before recording. I noticed that the 16 steps of the Matrix ARP are copied, not on purpose I guess, to the sequencer when you switch. Would be cool to be able to export. Oh yeah, well, yeah, I think this was a little bug. So basically, what you hear when you play notes on the Matrix arpeggiator are the notes you're playing on the keyboard, so it's an arpeggiator. So having steps is kind of weird because it's supposed to play the notes you're playing on the keyboard. And I'm not sure the format will fit, or we would need a way to change the pages because the 3 bottom rows, blocks of rows are taken already. So I'm not sure we can do that. Maybe in a future update, but we need to figure a way to make it smooth and to make it fit the workflow. how to set an LFO to the CV out. So basically, all the modulation outputs that you can see here have their own CV outputs around here. And if you want to send, for example, the LFO1 through one of the CV output, you only have to, I will start a blank preset. You only have to, for example, connect the LFO1 to, let's say, the VCO2 pulse width, set an amount, and at this moment, the CV will be sent through the CV out. And you can repeat the operation for each CV that you want to output from your MatrixBrute. Where can you find these two presets? So when we released this update, we released a brand new bank. So I don't remember the exact number, but it's maybe 64 presets. And basically, you can have it either from the MIDI control center, and it's called Factory 2.0, or you can also access it from our web store, from the sounds section, so the preset section of our website. But the easier is actually to download them from the MIDI control center. Oh, thank you. I love you too, guys. Okay, so that's it. Well, okay, no other questions. Well, thank you so much, guys, for watching. I hope that it was full of new informations for you. If you don't have a Matrix, I hope that you want to get one now. And if you already have a Matrix, I hope that it will give you the temptation to spend more time on it and maybe to be less bored during this isolation period. So thank you again for listening, and I hope that we will maybe see again in another workshop soon. So take care and stay safe and stay at home.
Thank you.